This is Conversations on Careers and Professional Life, a podcast from the Foster School of Business, MBA Career Management Office. I'm your host, Gregory Heller. On each episode, I talk with guests from faculty and staff to students and business leaders about the skills and strategies that can help you design a professional life that you're happy with. This episode features a conversation from March of 2020, just before the COVID-19 pandemic forced shutdowns of in-person learning at the university and closed our offices. It was the first conversation I recorded with two participants that were remote and used some new equipment. The audio quality is not as great as other episodes and required a bit more editing than usual. Despite the changes in life, work, and school that we've all experienced, the subject matter is as relevant today as it was then. My guests, Tony Bach and Larissa Benson, are longtime mindfulness practitioners and are trained by the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. I had the opportunity to participate in a 2-day training they led through the UW Resilience Lab and wanted to bring them on to share some of their experiences and expertise. Tony is a medical doctor, the co-director of the UW Center for Excellence in Palliative Care, and a UW professor of Oncology and Medicine, and an adjunct professor of Bioethics and Humanities. He is also the founder of Vital Talk, a training organization for clinicians seeking to advance their communication skills with seriously ill patients. Larissa Benson is a leadership embodiment coach, the host of the Government Joy Network, and is the president of the board of the Whitby Institute. We discuss how they both came to Search Inside Yourself, the mindfulness training program developed at Google, how they bring mindfulness practices into their work and life, and some practices you can try in your life to be more mindful and communicate more effectively. I hope you'll enjoy my conversation on careers and professional life with Tony Bach and Larissa Benson. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Gregory.
Thanks for having us, Gregory.
So the reason that I wanted to have both of you on the podcast is because of your experience guiding people through trainings around Search Inside Yourself, as well as your individual expertise around mindfulness. We met through a Search Inside Yourself workshop here at the university about a year ago. And I had already been familiar with the book and been practicing mindfulness myself and wanted to see it in action in the workplace and how it's sort of trained. Can we start by talking a little bit about the genesis of Search Inside Yourself?
Sure. Shall I take a shot at that one?
Sure.
So I found out about Search Inside Yourself in 2015, which was just when they were turning into a global leadership institute. But its origins actually started, I think, back in 2012 when Google, some people were still calling Google a small startup and they were going global. But, you know, at that time, as their sort of meteoric rise to a big global corporation was starting, that there was a lot of pressure on those internal engineers to scale up. And there was one engineer there named Meng, and he launched this internal effort to help them hack the life stresses they were experiencing. And they recruited just some of the most well-respected researchers in the field of neuroscience to help them crack the code for increased well-being. And they started this 8-week course in very practical meditation skills, and they called it, of course, Search, Inside Yourself. And well, since they started offering that course, there's, I think, been a 9 months waiting list for a long time, and a lot of other companies were interested in what they were doing. And they published this article on the primary determinants of successful teamwork in the New York Times, and eventually the whole program was spun out into a Global Leadership Institute. It's a nonprofit organization. It's been teaching this program in about 50 different companies, or countries, actually, across the world.
And the popular book, I think it was a New York Times bestseller, Search Inside Yourself.
Indeed. And another one after that, Joy on Demand.
Yes, I've read both. And Tony, how did you come to Search Inside Yourself? And give us a little bit about your background, and then we'll come back to Larissa and we'll hear a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I have been a Zen meditator for about 25 years now, and have followed the rise of mindfulness in the popular culture very closely because I've been very interested in how these ancient contemplative practices are getting translated into our contemporary world. And I came across Search Inside Yourself, um, honestly, just in the media, and started to look into it and felt like they had done a great job bringing pedagogy about how people learn to these techniques of how to keep your mind more stable, more calm, more on track. And as I had looked around at the different kinds of entry-level kinds of training that was available for people in mindfulness, I actually felt like this was one of the best researched, best taught ones. And so that's why I decided to enter the teacher training program. And that's how I met Larissa.
And when you're not training people on mindfulness techniques, tell us a little bit about what you are doing.
Oh, right. I'm a doctor at the School of Medicine at the University of Washington, and I'm a medical oncologist and palliative care specialist, and I'm the co-director of the Cambia Palliative Care Center of Excellence here.
And have you brought Search Inside Yourself into your work with other doctors and medical professionals?
Yeah, definitely. I actually bring it into rounds every day. We have a moment of just getting ourselves started, a moment to reflect, and I am also doing some work teaching this to the heads of training programs in a number of different specialties. And in about a month, I'll be doing a short version of Search Inside Yourself, just a couple of hours, that actually is going to be a required session for all the training program directors in the School of Medicine.
Wow, that sounds great. And Larissa, tell us a little bit about what you do when you're not training people on mindfulness through Search Inside Yourself.
Thank you. Well, I'm first and foremost, I'm a mother and a daughter. Both of those roles provide plenty of opportunities to practice what I learned in Search Inside Yourself. Like me, my mother's a University of Washington graduate. I'm a teacher. I taught for several years at the Daniel J. Evans School of Governance and Public Policy and helped them start their executive MPA program. I'm a community builder. I'm a host. The Government Joy Network I'm involved with is a movement to bring more joy into government and the civic social experience. And I'm a volunteer. I spend the majority of my time volunteering at the Whidbey Institute, focusing on the evolution and well-being for all people. We help organizations and communities that are suffering and healing our relationship with all beings on the planet Earth.
And before getting involved with Search Inside Yourself, did you have a history with mindfulness or meditation? Any particular practice or tradition?
Sure. It's just a sort of a fluke happenstance that Tony and I both follow a Zen path. We were randomly assigned to be buddies, like meditation secret Santas in the Search Inside Yourself program, and just discovered with great delight that we both had been sitting Zen for, I started in 2002, so we've been at it for a while. I don't know if that's because it takes me a long time, or I'm stubborn, or it's just been an amazing experience that keeps giving me more and more life. Probably all of the above.
It's why they call it practice, right?
Yes.
And with your work with government leaders and others, when you're not explicitly doing Search Inside Yourself trainings, are you bringing that kind of mindfulness or mindfulness practices to those communities?
Yes. It's really helpful, and I actually find it easy and accessible. Don't even call it mindfulness or meditation. Because for some reason that kind of kicks people's mindset into something exotic, esoteric, difficult to do. I don't know, people have a lot of different conceptions about what that means. But no matter what you're doing, you're interacting with other people, and other people have different ways. We don't always agree. And especially in governance, in community government, local government, anything having to do in the civic or social sphere, you're going to have people who disagree with one another or are coming from a different point of view. And yet we all need to figure out how we're going to work together. So I would say that that's the most fruitful place where using some of these techniques to regain our own self-composure, calm down and learn how to see things from someone else's point of view, figure out how to empathize with other people without losing our own center and focus, the strength of our convictions while we're sort of reaching across divides. Simple practices that give people a chance to take a breath, take a new look at an old problem, and figure out new ways of working with one another. It comes in awfully handy.
So much that I want to respond to there. I spent 6 years serving on a community board in New York City, which is the most local form of government, where some of the most contentious decisions, such as sidewalk cafes and liquor licenses and real estate redevelopment, came before us. And I could have, at the young age and low level of experience that I had during that time, I think I could have used some of these tools to keep my composure and help my fellow community board members do the same. And as we are recording this in the heat of the presidential primary election nominating contests on Super Tuesday, I can't help but think how different the world would be if more of this made its way into the other Washington.
Sure. What if they had taken a breath at some point during those debates?
Yeah,
that might have changed the whole thing. But just like you started us off at the beginning of the broadcast, Gregory, you invited us to take a breath. I mean, you can just say when it's feeling tense, hey, why don't we take a breath? And it's amazing because of the mirror neurons in our bodies. People know it's time to take a breath, and they'll just kind of sigh and relax and back off for just a moment. And it can make all the difference in the world. It's just like a little unweight, a little pivot that allows you to change directions and kind of get a hold of yourself for a moment, even just one breath.
Right. I think the key there is like giving permission for the people in the room to actually back down for that moment. It can be so instrumental.
That's it.
Now, we haven't talked, other than breathing, about some of the specific practices that are part of Search Inside Yourself. But before we get there, I jotted down a note. I wanted to hear what some of the misconceptions, the most common misconceptions that you each hear from people related to mindfulness and practicing mindfulness are.
Where to start? Larissa, do you want to, should we alternate? How about that?
I love it. Yeah, I got one.
Go.
Well, I was reflecting a little bit. Someone asked me if I could come give their organization a talk on mindfulness and leadership. And I was reflecting on the paradox that, on one level, we want and expect our leaders to be inspiring and heroic, like perfect specimens of humanity. And yet vulnerability, the very act of disclosing our weakness, is actually the key to creating a felt sense of genuine connection. And so they asked it's a leadership program that they're talking about. And what they were kind of getting to is this common misconception that meditators or compassion practitioners are pushovers. That it's some kind of retreat to your cushion and just, be at peace and just get along and that sort of thing. And we were working on a slide deck that had pictures of people like Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm thinking, was Dr. Martin Luther King a pushover? How about Mandela or Gandhi? I mean, just think about it. It's actually such an incredible source of power and strength. It just presents with a softness and humanity that is just different than your sort of classic, I don't know what the alternative is, but you get what I'm getting at here. This misconception that that you have to be a pushover if you're going to be kind or compassionate or that sort of
the
thing.
Authoritarian, like high command kind of leadership style, as opposed to
yes, yeah.
Okay, how about you, Tony?
My favorite one is that it's just about zoning out and disconnecting from everything, when in fact being mindful is actually being more present with everything. It's not about escaping. It's about actually being right in the middle of the mess.
I often hear or see the misconception that it's about emptying your mind.
Yes.
Right. like having no thoughts,
Yes.
as opposed to being aware and conscious of the thoughts that you're having
Yes.
and returning your attention to a particular focus. Do you have another one for us, Larissa?
Yeah, there's a lot of this one actually is this misconception I would say is also reflected in the research. There's a bunch of research that talks about, the difference between state and trait mindfulness. And there are differences. If you've got someone who's been practicing mindfulness for days on end for decades, they are going to have a different quality of being and ability to regulate their systems. But you actually can access the benefits of breathing, of self-regulating, of understanding emotions and how to regulate the stress with some very simple techniques that do not take decades to master and don't require you to go off into the hills and be silent and not be part of humanity.
I had another guest on this program, Andy Haffenbrack, a few episodes ago, and his research actually has looked at the difference between state and trait mindfulness. And I think it's worth maybe talking about the definition of the two. State mindfulness being that temporary state you can enter through, even one mindful breath, and trait mindfulness being more associated with the Zen monk or practitioner who is able to control their emotions as many of us control our iPhones, for example. The Mathieu Ricards of the world, who are renowned for their ability to be mindful under adverse conditions and really modulate their emotions in a way that many of us would hope to be able to do. Did I capture that distinction correctly?
Yeah. Yeah, that's perfect.
I'd love to move into how you have seen the application of some of these techniques from Search Inside Yourself in the workplace, and the impact that you've seen them have in your time training people.
Yeah. Larissa, do you want to go first on this one?
After you this time, my friend.
Okay, sorry. Okay, yes. So my workplace, is the hospital and the clinic, and people, the clinicians, are busy, pressed. There's a lot of work with patients and a lot of administrative work that's going on at the same time, and there is this tendency that people have to try to multitask, to do 10 things at once, to meet all these different demands on them all at once. And what it happens when people do that is their attention just gets fragmented and dispersed. They end up at the end of the day totally frazzled, unable to concentrate on anything. And progressively through the day, they get less and less attentive to any one person. And it can leave patients feeling like nobody cares, that no one's really paying attention, that they're just another, cog in the wheel. And I think mindfulness, when practiced consistently, it can really be an antidote to all that. It's really important when you're walking into a patient's room to bring your full attention to that person. And then it's equally important to move on to the next thing when your visit is done and talk to your administrative assistant or talk to somebody who's working with you on a grant, and to be able to give them your full attention. And I think what it tells us is that trying to do more and more things all at the same time is actually counterproductive. And you can move through the day being more effective and with less stress and actually performing at a higher level if you learn to control your attention. And it's not something, we were ever taught in school. It's something we're all learning now.
And almost through our situational experience have been taught not to do.
Exactly. I mean, we're taught that it's better to just respond to respond to everything in the moment, right? But actually, that's not good for us, and it's not good for the people that we're with either.
So what are some of the easiest practices to adopt that can get you moving in that direction?
Well, the one Larissa mentioned is actually just taking a breath to sort of ground yourself every time you enter a new task, or every time you turn your attention to a new thing. We're kind of somehow programmed to believe that our brains can just switch, and there's no cost to it. But every time you task switch, it turns out that requires energy and glucose, and it requires resources. And so being really conscious when we task switch, that we should pause for a moment, get ourselves centered, and then move into the work. It turns out that is a really simple but very useful practice. And then the thing I'll say is that the more you have an established mindfulness practice that you can refer to, that allows you to drop into that place of deep attention more quickly, more easily, with less effort, that's why practice in a daily way is so important, so that when you're in the middle of your busy day, you can be better at dropping into the place where you perform best.
I think that's a great endorsement for building up to that daily practice. And I know that as I have explored this realm, much more of a novice than the two of you, but I recognize the difference that I feel in a day where I haven't practiced in the morning from the days that I do.
Yeah.
And my ability to access that calm and that focus when I've started the day off with it, it's much easier. It's like I can recognize it sooner.
Totally. That's exactly right.
And how about you, Larissa? What are some ways that you've seen mindfulness enter the workplace through your work?
So many. I'm thinking about, right now, I'm thinking about a program that we host at the Whidbey Institute called Young Women Empowered. And I'm thinking about this principle that we use in that community called step up, step back. Something, actually, it's like a rule of an agreement that we use in a lot of community dialogue conversations. And what it means is that to attune to whether you're stepping up or you need to step up or step back in a conversation. And so there are situations where I find myself as a white cisgendered woman holding a lot of privilege, that my work to do in that situation is to step back and to listen, even though I may be having feelings of excitement or defensiveness, and learning how to listen and stay tuned in and not become defensive is really important work. And for many of the young women that we're working with, some of them have challenges stepping up. They're not used to using their voices. They may have assumptions or narratives or history of not being heard. And it's really about practicing finding your voice, taking a stand with some clarity and precision, learning to speak up and to be comfortable and confident with that. So it all depends. Everything's situational, how we show up and how we comport ourselves. But that's really what makes a difference in the outcome of any situation, whether I'm all by myself struggling to get something done on deadline, or whether I'm with other people who are trying to get something done together. These practices really help us in these different dimensions of inclusiveness, hearing criticism without taking it personally, and being able to speak our truth with some clarity and precision. I would say in all of those situations, these practices that's what I rely on. They really are very helpful. They are not cure-alls. It does take practice, but it's kind of amazing, and they're all free. All of this stuff is possible for us to learn on our own and to help one another get better at.
You mentioned power and privilege and ground rules. And I'm wondering if you have any advice to someone who maybe has less positional power and is in a situation where there aren't those ground rules. Are there ways to introduce some of these practices when a person is in that position, right? Not just the self-practice of recognizing what's going on and bringing mindfulness into their life, but I'm thinking of, let's say, a junior person on a team who is noticing a negative pattern that is happening regularly in team meetings. Are there ways that you think they can introduce some of these practices and help bring some of these ground rules into place so that they and people who are in similar positions as them in that situation can affect change?
Sure. I'm happy to. And I want to give credit to the people that I've been learning this from, because these were not things I came up with myself, but boy, they've helped me a lot. And these are mostly very young people. I work on a couple of projects. One includes a goal to end youth homelessness across Washington state. And so there are a lot of young people with systems experience in the foster care system, in the juvenile justice system, our behavioral health systems. And the more I listen to them and watch how they operate, and noticing the preconceptions that I myself brought to the table, thinking, oh, wow, these are not folks. These folks have been knocked around by life and this, that, the other thing, all these preconceptions I had. And then watching how they operate, find themselves and find each other, and be able to give voice in a situation where they are not the people showing up with the power and the privilege. But my goodness, they are influencing the dialogue and they are exerting their influence. And one of the ways has to do with noticing the situation, and that helps you not feel all by yourself. So what happens when our fight, flight, or freeze stimulus, our nervous system is activated? Neurochemically, hormones are released in our system and our vision literally narrows. And that's important because what happens is we start to feel smaller than we are, right? Because we are just focusing on whatever the perceived threat is, and we can't possibly see all the potential allies or other people around us. And if you really tune in, you can even connect with people who aren't even in the room, right? You can connect with the people who came before you, or the people that you know that love you, or that there are other people who might have this same concern or viewpoint than you do, even if the four people in front of you happen to be in opposition to what you might say. And when you can take a breath and connect to those sources of power, other people that you know, your beliefs, where you came from, your goals, where you're headed, this can reorient a whole conversation with just one person.
I think that's great advice. I know that I often tell students, before going into a situation like an interview where there is that power dynamic, right, to take a few moments to connect with times when you have been powerful and successful, personal accomplishments, as a way of priming yourself to counteract the natural fight, flight, freeze response that you might feel when you get into that high stress, high stakes situation. So I hear some of that there, and thinking about the people who have supported you in the past or the people who've come before you. I think those are great additions to that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, you can literally condition yourself. You can change what hormones are running in your body by the things you think about. And then what happens, this is a cool thing about human beings and all our mirror neurons, you start actually changing the people around you once you do that, right? Fear begets fear and kindness begets kindness. If you're practicing it and breathing and calm, it automatically influences the situation around you.
Tony, as the medical professional on this call, can you attest to the fact that this is what happens in the human body?
Oh, absolutely. So, our emotional state is basically contagious. We are all kind of reverberating with each other all the time. And so there is actually a lot of science that shows how we are exquisitely sensitive to each other in ways that are much deeper than just talking or looking at each other. We're sensing each other and checking each other out at some level all the time. And so when we are in a state of less alarm, on guard, defensiveness, actually it relaxes the people that we're with. And so there are ways that you can influence a gathering, a group, a meeting without saying a word. It's about how you bring yourself into the situation. And the scientists would say, well, it's things like your body language or your tone of voice or your selection of words. And all that can come like almost effortlessly. If you start at a place where you put your own physiology into this kind of relaxed, alert, ready kind of configuration.
What are some of the ways that you would recommend, short of a full training in Search Inside Yourself and reading the whole book, for people who are listening? What are some of the practices that you would recommend starting with for that kind of an impact? If you're in meetings, you're in high stakes one-on-one interactions like job interviews, what are some practices that you might recommend?
Yeah, well, one might be to spend a moment before you go into the meeting. It might literally be the 5 steps, in the 5 steps that you take as you get through the door and sit down, and give yourself this. Um, what could I do to bring my best self to this gathering? Like, could I just take one breath, relax, and think, how can I bring my best self to this? What is it that I'd like to contribute? And I think that can shift you in just a moment.
Larissa,
Yeah.
is there other advice that you would have?
Sure, I'll share one. I'm also just enjoying the practicality and just the wisdom in a lot of the things that Tony just mentioned about how exquisitely we can tune and how quickly we can do it. So, two things are coming to mind. One is the power of our bodies and the sense of touch. So, if you're going to be entering a situation and you're nervous, and if you could call to mind like the quality you want to project, courage, compassion, confidence, whatever it might be, I would suggest just simplifying it down to one word that calls it forth for you. And then imagine, let's say you're going to be shaking hands with someone that you're going to meet. Just as soon as your hands touch, just like trigger that from the palm of your hand. Or if you're not going to be shaking hands, you could just touch the top of the chair that you're going to pull it out and sit into. Or maybe as you reach for the doorknob. I just encourage us to use our bodies as much as our minds. They're actually a lot faster and more powerful. You've probably heard some of the research about communication and influence and how little our words matter. They do matter. Language is important, but at least 70% of our communication is nonverbal. So just take that into your understanding and put it to your use. Harness your body. Just touch something. You could even say, okay, I'm going to use my special confidence pen or my special calm notebook. And then as soon as you touch your hand to that, you can just learn to trigger that in yourself and other folks.
It is powerful how much of our communication, as you say, it doesn't have to do with the words that come out of our mouth. And a lot of that is the way that people feel about you and can be influenced by the body language, by the tone of voice. And there have been some amazing studies that have looked at doctors and their interactions with patients on a not the words that they say, but the way they say the words, and how likely those doctors are to be sued for malpractice, for example, or married couples and the tone of their interactions. And I think this research came out of the Gottman Institute here at the University of Washington, and looking at the tone of voice used between two people and the likelihood that they would that their relationship would end in divorce. So we can be conscious of this. We can prime ourselves to think about how we use our voice, how we use our body language, how we make eye contact to influence the way people feel about us, and then the way they feel about the things that we are saying. So in a business context, the recommendations we might be making, if delivered powerfully with appropriate tone and body language, they might be well received. And if delivered another way with less mindfulness and intention, they might not be well received and maybe the same recommendation.
Yeah, I love Dr. Gottman's research. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Marsha Linehan too, because her work on dialectical behavioral therapy has been just so profoundly influencing. But you mentioned doctors specifically, and I don't know if you know, because Tony was modest and didn't mention about Vital Talk. Would you mind, Tony? Am I putting you on the spot asking you to
Oh,
talk to us
sure.
about Vital Talk? Because I just think it's
Sure.
so cool.
I am the co-founder of a social entrepreneurship startup called Vital Talk, where we took all this research that we had generated over about 2 decades of NIH-funded stuff and turned it into a way to disseminate communication skills training for doctors and nurses who take care of people with a serious illness and their families. And so we actually have a training where these clinicians work with actors who are trained to portray patients, and they can both practice the skills and practice being mindful all in one kind of go. And much of what, quite a bit of what we teach is just preparing yourself to be ready, going in a relaxed way, and then actually being able to pause even in the middle of a conversation just to collect yourself if you feel like you've really gotten pushed off balance. And you can do the same thing. It's so easy to say, hey, give me a minute to think about that. And it's a way that you can collect yourself if you're feeling like, wow, I'm just kind of all over the place here.
That sounds fantastic. And I know that the students that I work with, I often tell them to develop these time buying phrases. Like, let me have a minute to think about that,
Uh-huh.
so that in the moment, they don't feel frozen and not know how to respond, but they have a way and they've practiced a way to respond to an unfamiliar question or a really probing follow-up that they hadn't thought of. And students have reported that they find that very helpful to just have those 3 or 4 time-buying phrases that can help them refocus and deal with what otherwise might be a really uncomfortable silence.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as we're coming to the end of our conversation here, which I think we could probably talk for hours if we had the time, but unfortunately we don't, and my listeners don't either have the time to listen to us talk for hours. I'm wondering if there are some final recommendations that you would have for someone who is interested in exploring bringing more mindfulness into their daily lives at work or at home. Are there particular resources that you would point them to, or particular practices that you think are a good place to start? We've already talked about the mindful breath, and you mentioned identifying some essentially cues. I was going to say triggers, but really cues, like touching the back of a chair or walking out of your office or into your office. Are there some others that you would recommend that come from Search Inside Yourself?
Yes, search inside yourself and other resources. I'm so glad you asked this question because there's so many awesome things. And I would love to share just a couple of the ones that have really influenced me. The current chair of Search Inside Yourself is a woman named Rhonda McGee. She's a law professor down at the University of San Francisco, and she wrote a book called The Inner Work of Racial Justice. And it's just really, it's a wonderful personal story, but it's also got all this fantastic science application and very specific journaling prompts and many more exercises like the ones or tips that we just mentioned. It's full of it. And Wendy Palmer, one of my teachers, wrote a book called Leadership Embodiment. Again, just so clear, so practical, and just a joy to read. And my other favorite book is My Grandmother's Hands, which is actually about racialized trauma and how to heal our hearts and bodies. And there again, I just want to encourage us to use our whole body, understand that the mind and the body are connected. There's so many healing practices.
Are there any books that you like to recommend, Tony?
Well, I just to come back to the theme of this, I think the Search Inside Yourself book is a terrific initial entry point into this work. And the other book I really like is called 10% Happier by Dan
Harris.
Harris. He's an ABC newscaster who had a little bit of a panic attack on national TV and has created a website and an app and a book that I think are really practical and really accessible. So I really like them.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the app and definitely used it for over a year when developing my mindfulness practice, and have used the Calm app as well.
Yeah.
And now I'm sort of going through them because, you kind of listen to all of the meditations that you like, then I look for another one. And now I'm actually using the I used Headspace, and now I'm using Calm. So I've used the 10% Happier app, I've used Headspace app, and the Calm app, and there are a number of others which I've talked about with people on my podcast before. And then also for students who are at the university, there are mindfulness classes at the IMA, as well as guided meditations that you can find on the UW Mindfulness website. And I'll put links to all of those in my show notes. I want to thank both of you for coming on the program and sharing some of your experiences and some advice around bringing mindfulness into our daily lives as well as into our work. I want to thank you for leading the workshop that I took, which I thought was fantastic and really provided a practical as well as lived experience of some of these practices that I had already read about in the Search Inside Yourself book. And I think that one of the things that I would really recommend to anyone listening is you can read about this stuff all day long, but until you start practicing it, you haven't really experienced it. So I would say start practicing it even in the smallest of ways while doing your research and learning more about it.
Thank you, Gregory. It was really fun to share all our little hacks to getting stronger with our compassion muscles, and I really appreciated this conversation.
Me too. Thank you, Gregory.
The two most powerful takeaways from my conversation with Tony and Larissa, and from the workshop they led, are that we can all incorporate small moments of mindfulness in our daily life, and we can use these micro practices like a single breath, not only on our own, but with other people, to slow down, refocus, and be more present. Check out the show notes at conversationsoncareers.com for links to websites and books that we mentioned during the conversation. Thank you for listening to another episode of Conversations on Careers and Professional Life. I'd love to hear what you think about the podcast. You can email me at gheller@uw.edu. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or classmate.